Well, I am delighted to say that joining me on the Godcast today is Reverend Canon Sarah Jones. Now, Sarah is an Anglican priest and is actually the priest in charge in the city parish of St John the Baptist in Cardiff, but is also an honorary canon at Llandaff Cathedral. Sarah was previously Rector of Ross-on-Wye and Walford and Brampton Abbotts in the Diocese of Hereford, and was the first person to have made a gender change and then be recommended for training for ordination within the Church of England. Sarah, quite a long introduction, but lovely to welcome you to the Godcast. How are you?
I'm fine, thanks, Alex. Yes, absolutely. And thanks for inviting me.
A pleasure. Whereabouts are you, Sarah? Are you down in Cardiff this morning?
Yep, central Cardiff. The vicarage actually is just about a mile from the city centre, a mile from the church, because we couldn't quite get the vicarage to be right in town. But about as close to the city centre as you can get. And the church, St John's, is absolutely smack bang in the centre of Cardiff.
So is it an attraction for tourists? Do you see lots of tourists visit?
Yeah, definitely. In my predecessor added them all up on a little survey, and reckoned that there was about 1,000 people a week come through the doors. The last couple of years with the pandemic, we've actually been shut, apart from when we're having services,
Mm.
largely because as a city centre church, you open the doors, people tumble in, various of them in various kind of, you know. I don't know, under the influence of various things. And that's normally great. We just love meeting
Mm.
people like that. But we just really felt we couldn't keep the place hygienic and safe. So we're open at a limited amount of time at the moment, but we're just beginning to reopen now because so many tourists and so many local people would normally be popping in.
Yeah. Oh, well, we'll perhaps come back to that in a little while. Let's go back, Sarah, to maybe you as a young person. Were you raised in a Christian environment? Was church a familiar thing for you as a young person?
Oh yeah, very much so. My mother was a Roman Catholic, and took me to church from as young as I can remember, and it all just made sense to me. I mean, age appropriate, of course, but it really did. Every week, and hearing the stories from the Gospels or the readings from either of the Testaments, it just really sank into my heart. And this idea that it's not all about us, that there's something beyond us, that there's a common purpose and ideas of goodness, justice, mercy. It all just was there for me, and it's throughout my life. It's been quite a stable commitment.
Yeah. And so you were proactive in the church, were you? Can you recall some of the things you did? Just tell us a bit about what you did in church.
Yeah, well, well, we were lucky really. We sat at the front, which was very nice. So even as a kind of 6-year-old, I saw everything. I saw the priest going around the altar and all of this kind of business. And it was a small church, so I really felt part of it. I served at the altar, in my teens. I read lessons. I play guitar, so in school I was part of the kind of guitar worship band. So yeah, it was quite important.
Yeah.
And then gradually, much as I loved my Roman Catholic kind of upbringing in terms of the faith, I bumped into the Church of England, and I mean this is going to sound really, really, really dull, but I just fell in love with the Church of England, and this was in the ASB, the kind of 1980s service, which so many people say, oh my word, that wasn't as good as what we have now or what we had before it. The first church service I went to in the Church of England, I went with a boyfriend actually, and I just thought, what is this? This is so important. So I kind of began my move towards Anglicanism, and now I'm a very happy Anglican.
Yeah. And how early in your life were you thinking about potentially becoming a priest? Was it there from a young age, or did it kind of creep up on you later in life?
No, no, it was there early. So you have to remember now, I was brought up as a Roman Catholic, and I have made a gender change. So I was brought up as a boy, and that's like really hard for me to say and think. But anyway, so when I was about 7 or 8, I had said to my mum, and my mum told my dad that I thought that I would like to be a priest. And bless him, I remember my dad taking me aside and saying very kind of I don't know, authoritatively, I didn't bring you into this world to waste your life as a priest. And so, oh my word, gosh. And then, of course, as I grew up, I became more aware of my, shall we say, conflicts of gender identity or sexuality. And I did sort of feel, obviously, that there was no chance of ministry for me. So you kind of get on with life, don't you? And then, long story short, when I made my gender change, I really thought, although I was an Anglican by then, I really thought that, I mean, I said to God, well, I've done it now, haven't I? You know, there's no chance of being ordained. And yet God had other plans.
Mm. And just talking about that conflict of matters there regarding your gender, was that a wrestling period for you with your faith? Were you, were you ever, was your faith ever challenged by your situation that you found yourself in?
Well, it was challenged, but I mean, I think our faith should challenge us every day on pretty much everything anyway. But you know, specifically about sexuality and gender. So when I went to primary school, I mean, I was an only child, and so I didn't have anything to compare myself to. But as soon as I got to school, I mean, literally in the first year or two, I realized I just somehow was more one of the girls than one of the boys, more feminine than masculine, more female than male, however one would put it. And I had to wrestle with this as I grew up. So as I was beginning to bring this to faith, I when I realized that I thought I might have a problem and that I might actually have to do something about it, in other words, make a change, I did have to interrogate my faith and spirituality. So I did have to look at the passages. You know, there are passages in Deuteronomy, a man shall not wear women's clothes, a woman shall not wear man's clothes. There are even more pointed passages than that. And I had to look at those and say, look, if I really believe that, even just take Genesis, male and female, God made them male and female right at the beginning of the Bible. If I took those passages seriously in the understanding that a lot of people have of them at face value, reading in English, then did I have the license to make a gender change, or should I just be unhappy for all of my life and say, well, I don't know why this has happened, but I can't do anything that God would disapprove of? So I did begin a very long and slow exploration, let's say, of passages, faith and stuff. I went on retreats, I spoke to people, I read things. So yeah, I did have to I did have to take that very seriously.
Yeah. And I suppose alongside that relationship with God, there is that relationship with your friends and your loved ones and your family. Can you remember the first person you shared with when you said you were thinking about your gender and changing identity? Just tell us about that, Sarah, please.
Do you know, I'm honestly not sure who I shared it with first. It could have been a doctor or a counsellor. I can tell you a few encounters. I don't know which would be the first, but I did go on retreat when I kind of got to a stage. You know, at the beginning, it was just something that was in me which wasn't much of a problem. I was more feminine than anyone realized, but there are advantages to that. I got on great with the women in the office, and one or two guys thought I must be some kind of dark horse, having lots of relationships with women. And the truth was that we were more just women together. But anyway, there were advantages to that, but it got to the stage where it almost became pressurizing me. It became the biggest single thing in my life, and I didn't feel I could go on. So
Mm.
I went on retreat, and maybe some of your your viewers will know that there's often a warden of a retreat house, and in those days there were usually quite old priests who'd done a lot of service, and so when I went there, I got offered the chance to speak to the warden, and I wasn't particularly hopeful. I mean, what's the chances that some old priest, which I had picked at random, might give me anything sensible about a gender change? Most people,
Mm.
this was in the 1980s, most people had never really heard of it. And I was there for 3 days. And on the first day, he said, "Well, I don't really know, but let's talk tomorrow and the next day, and we'll see where we go." And I borrowed a book of his, Merton. I remember I wanted to read something of Merton. And on the last day, he said to me, he said, "I don't know, Sarah." He said, I don't know a lot about this, but it seems to me that what you are is God's gift to you, and what you become is your gift to God." And I just thought, oh my word,
Mm.
this is a really quite long retired priest with no specialism in any of this stuff. And he has just said the most amazing thing.
Yeah.
He was saying, don't do anything frivolous, but look, what you are is what God's given you. Now, how can you be the best possible disciple? And if you really think that means you have to change your gender, then maybe it's on. So, I mean, I was just kind of bowled over by that. And, 35 years later, or whatever it is, 40 years later, I'm still thinking about that. So,
Yeah.
yeah, I
What
mean,
a,
there were
what
lots of encounters along the way.
what a wonderful encouragement though from that man who you
Oh,
clearly never forget.
Oh, amazing. And to this day, it was in Llandaff in Leicestershire. And I only went there because it was in the old days for the internet. So I just had a book and I rang
Mm.
round every retreat centre in alphabetical order and said, "I'd like to go on retreat." And they said, "Yeah, when do you want to come?" And I'd say, "No, I need to come now." And Laund was the first place that had a space.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
totally random, or maybe not.
Maybe not. Yes, indeed. Sarah, and when it and uh, when it was revealed to the world in your smaller context and the wider context, how was that? Was that a difficult period of time for you? Did you get much resistance? Were there Christians who were critical of you? Just
Yeah.
tell us through that little period of your life.
Yeah. Well, so I took about 9 years, from the early to mid 80s through to the early 90s before I made my gender change. I took a lot of time. And in the end, I made it because I felt it was absolutely actually the only thing I could do. It was me. So when I made my change, after the first few weeks, honestly, I pretty much forgot about it. It was so natural to me that I just went about my life and I forgot about it completely. And the only way I can kind of explain it to anyone who doesn't know about gender changes is, if you're really happily married and you've been happily married for, I don't know, 5, 6 years, and someone says, "Are you single or married?" You just automatically say, "Yeah, I'm married." You can think back to when you were single, but there's no debate in your mind. You know what you are, blah blah blah. So um, I had pretty much forgotten, for all intents and purposes, about my gender change. I was just getting on with life, and it didn't come into conversation, didn't come up. When I offered myself for ordination, I did say at my very, very first interview, um, I did tell them about my gender change. I mean, it would have come out anyway, but I just thought it was better to say right at the beginning. And the interview had gone quite well. And I thought, well, if I don't say anything now, it'll be kind of disrespectful of the first person that interviewed me, you know.
Mm.
So the church knew the whole way along. And there I was in the Diocese of Hereford. It's the most rural diocese in the Church of England. And some people might think that that would be a bit of a rural backwater, you know, full of really kind of reactionary views. And it really wasn't. The diocese said, well, we've no idea what to do. We've no idea what's possible, but give us some time. We'll talk it through with the Church of England. We'll talk it through with the diocese, and we'll go back. You'll get back to, you know. So they put me in the system. So all the way along, the church authorities knew about my background. What I didn't know is that there were 3 or 4 other people in the system, just a little bit behind me in terms of time. So I think the Church of England knew that it needed to make some decisions. And eventually they decided that if I had a vocation, there was no reason why someone who had made a gender change should not be ordained, as long as you met all of the criteria. So I got ordained. It wasn't a topic for open conversation because it was my private business,
Mm-hmm.
and we didn't want a media storm, but everyone who needed to know knew. There was no deceit or anything. So I'm sitting at my desk about 8 months into the job on a Friday, and I get a phone call from a freelance journalist working for a national newspaper who says, are these your old details? They had my old name, various bits about me. I'd been very deliberately outed. So the way it came out really was that there was going to be a national newspaper story, and yes, that was quite traumatic because a lot of the people in my life didn't know about my change. Why would they need to? The parishioners didn't know. Again, why would they need to? You know, they needed to know, could I bury someone? Could I preach properly? Did I love them? So we had a lot of people to tell in a very short period of time. And of course, as anyone who has ever been outed in the media will tell you, one of the things you can't control is what everybody else thinks. So, you know, I was a curate, an assistant priest in a market town. Everybody knew me. It wasn't like a city. Wherever I went, everyone knew who I was. And I was then faced with, how do I leave the front door tomorrow? Because as soon as I step out, every single person, whether they're 10 or 91, will have heard on numerous channels about my personal medical history, and they'll all have opinions. You know, some of them might be, oh, that's great, and some of them might be, it's a bit odd, but okay, and others might just take against you. So no, it was very, very worrying.
Mm. And did you, and what was it like walking out of the door, you know, on that
Well,
morning after? Just tell us about that.
yeah, well, I practiced. So the Friday I got the phone call, and the journalist wanted to come up straight away. And we managed to say to him, look, it's Friday. The services are all on Sunday. What if we gave you an interview with the Bishop of Hereford and Sarah at the Bishop's Palace? You get an exclusive interview for 1 hour, and they went for that, which was great. That allowed us to do the Sunday services. It allowed us, I was in a team of 14 parishes, which meant that we were able to get round all of the church wardens and all of the people who would need to know. So that was good of the paper. And then the interview was on the Monday, and then they didn't publish. So I got up Tuesday morning and had to go down to the newspaper shop, bought the newspaper, and I wasn't in there. And the next day, I had to do the same thing. So you're living waiting for the axe to fall.
Mm.
So what I did was I walked up and down the streets of Ross-on-Wye. There's only about 3 main streets, and I walked up and down, up and down. There's people smiling at me and looking at me and making eye contact and all of this. And I'm thinking, right, just imagine this is 3 days' time. How will this be? Practice, practice, practice. So anyway, when I did step out, it was a bit weird, but what could I do? I wasn't ashamed of what I'd done. I'd taken 30 years to get to that point, and 9 of them actively trying to make a decision. The change was maybe 10 or 12 years or something in the past, so it wasn't something I'd done a few weeks before. So I was comfortable in who I was. So I stepped out. A couple of people kind of crossed over and clearly didn't want to see me. A couple of people were clearly trying to work out, oh my word, there she is. How do we? 1 or 2 people made a very obvious attempt at greeting me and smiling and everything. So on the whole, the reception was very good. A couple of people were not so happy, but by and large, the people of the towns stood by me because they had known me first as a person. But it was very worrying, yeah. And it was also very upsetting for some of my friends because people were probably saying to them, well, you've known her and how come you never said anything? And so there's a wide shadow when these things happen.
Yeah. And how do you respond, Sarah? And do you engage with those who are who would be radically opposed to what you have done and your ministry? I'm part of Inclusive Church, and we would embrace you, and I'd love you to come maybe to Burnley one time and preach for us. But how do you rationalize that other side of the church where it can get quite vociferous and it can get quite personal? Just talk us through that, please.
Yeah, well, as maybe many of your viewers will know, in the Church of England, Church of Wales, the Anglican Church, you're ordained, if you like, twice. You're ordained as a deacon first, and then about a year later, often people are ordained as priest. So my outing happened between the two. So when I was ordained priest, there were some hardline conservative evangelicals actually on the radio saying that I should not be ordained, and that this was because I was going to be the first one, of course. And so there was a very public kind of this is really not this is something that should not happen. So it does hurt. It is difficult. My instinct is to engage. I don't think there's much chance of convincing anyone on this subject if they start particularly anti, if they really think that this is evil or wrong or desperately sinful or I'm desperately ill or whatever. I don't think there's much chance of having one friendly conversation and then them saying, do you know what, I've changed my mind. But still engaging is really important, connecting, hearing what they have to say, and I think just being real to people. So I generally try and engage. I don't engage with trolls, although occasionally I do respond to an angry or aggressive or mildly abusive communication. But it's always in the hope of saying, look, you're my brother or you're my sister. We're all in this together. Let's connect, because actually, like it or not, we are all part of one family. So that's how I say it. I mean, one of the things I'd love to do, to be fair, would be go to an evangelical type conference and basically say, hi, here I am. Let's talk. Let me listen to your fire some questions. Let's do this nicely. I'd kind of like to do that. And I think sometimes I should, if I was a bit more organized, I'd try and get an invitation to do that.
Yeah, I think that's very admirable, Sarah, to put yourself in that firing line, because it can get quite charged, can't it? And the views are very strongly held by some
That
people.
they are. But one of the things that gives me strength, though, apart from the fact that honestly, I mean, how can any of us really know whether we're doing God's will? Okay, so we look at the Bible, we pray and have a relationship with God. We try and see what other people have done or are doing, and all of this kind of stuff. But it's not as if God actually gives us totally incontroversial kind of evidence. We're reaching towards this. So a lot of our lives are educated, dedicated, best guess. And I honestly think that's where I am with this,
Yeah,
so we'll kind of see where we go, but it gives me strength. And the other thing that gives me strength is that um whenever I have been doing things in the media, I get letters or emails or something, phone call maybe, from someone who says, "Thank God I saw you," because, and then they either say, their sister, their brother, their dad, their child, whatever it is. So being visible, although I'm visible because I was outed, being visible on this issue actually, I think, is very helpful for other people, because there's a lot of people in this situation,
yeah, and
one way or another.
yeah,
There's a
and
lot of
yeah, and also, so I think it's very helpful to people who create a stereotype. Who they create a perception of what a transgender priest is
yes.
or will be like, and I think it's fantastic that you're prepared to speak in a public forum about these matters.
Thank you.
Just so you're now you kind of left the Church of England. You didn't travel too far, but you now by borders are now part of the Church of Wales. Has that been a big difference? Are the differences between the two churches clearly identifiable? I mean, I know that the Church of Wales is progressing at pace with the intent to bless same-sex relationships, but other than that, or as well as that, what are the key differences that you've observed?
Mm. Well, I ended up in the church in Wales because of the post that I saw advertised. So, some people are looking to move to a particular part of the United Kingdom or wherever. That wasn't where I was. I'd been in my previous parish for a long time. I was looking for a new post, and um, this particular post got advertised. It was central Cardiff, and I thought, okay, there was something about a call in it, so I I applied and got the job. The Church in Wales is very like the Church of England, but you're right. It is. Forgive me if this comes across in the wrong way, but it's quite a bit ahead of the Church of England in terms of inclusivity and diversity for matters of sexuality and gender.
Mhm.
All of the bishops have signed up to say very firmly that people's sexuality and their gender identity are to be celebrated and embraced, and it's about being disciples, not whether you're straight or usually gendered or cisgendered, as the
Yeah,
terminology might be. So in many ways it has been very, very good. And being the vicar of a city centre church, they're very happy for me to be reaching out into what I would call the queer community in all sorts of ways. It's part of the things they want me to do. And I know there are places in the Church of England where that would be possible. I dearly love the Church of England. My identity until I moved to this post was I am a Church of England priest. I mean, that was the thing. I mean, okay, yeah, I'm an Anglican or Episcopalian, or strip that back even more, I'm a priest. But actually, it came with the phrase Church of England. I am a Church of England priest. That was what I felt was my ontological state.
yeah,
Um, but the church in Wales has been lovely for me, and the Diocese of Llandaff in particular is incredibly supportive of people. What they're caring about is our discipleship, our journey of
Mm,
faith.
yeah.
And so yes, no, it's much smaller, um, more of a family atmosphere. Because it's smaller, as a diocese, it doesn't, or as a province even, I think the Church of England has some possibilities and some training and some infrastructure that the church in Wales doesn't have. But no, I'm very happy here.
Yeah. So it's been a real pleasure chatting to you today. Just a couple of final questions. What, Ross, you talked about three main streets, is a bit different to city centre Cardiff. Just tell me what it is you're loving about now living and working in a big city like Cardiff.
Yeah, I absolutely love the diversity of Cardiff as a city anyway. And when, our congregation now is very diverse, we've got people on in all points of the graph, whether it's socioeconomic or educational or in terms of gender or sexuality. So I like that. I like the fact that that reflects Cardiff. I like the buzz. I like the fact that I can be involved in things which are big issues for society. So, speaking to people who are addicted and literally outside our gates, begging for money, trying to do a little bit of work with homeless shelters and addiction agencies and things like that. So I love the fact that it's very much kind of, slightly dusty shoes. That's really, really good. And I absolutely loved my time in my previous parish. And I loved it so much that I did not want to go anywhere that looked like it. Because had I been in another market town, I
Yeah.
would just have stood there, well, this isn't Ross-on-Wye, this isn't
Yeah.
Walford, this isn't Brampton Abbotts. So the change into city centre did me a lot of good, and I'm very pleased about that.
Yeah. And excited about the future.
Yeah, very much. But I've no idea what the future will hold. I mean, I genuinely have no idea. So I have a very short horizon. I'm not ambitious and I don't plan ahead. I tend to just think in terms of terms. What can we do in the next 3 months or 6 months? And of
Yeah.
course, I have a slightly longer term plan for the church I'm in, but not a personal plan. I'm not thinking, oh well, I'll do this for this year and then it just, I'm happy to let that kind of unfold, which
Yeah.
is odd because by nature I'm a planner. I like things
Okay.
organized,
Okay.
but not in terms of ministry, in terms of what the future might be.
Yeah. Fabulous. And if people want to find out more about you and your church, where can they do that?
I am, having been outed in the media, I'm so easy to find. If anyone goes into any search engine and puts Sarah Jones trans priest or Rev Sarah Jones in, usually it's the first hit on these search engines. Um, and so they can connect there. And that will, St. John's Church, Cardiff is our church, but I'm on Twitter also. So, yeah, no, I'm incredibly easy to find. And by all means, and I speak to organizations and groups, in industry, which is just incredibly good for me, and they seem to enjoy it as well, because the church isn't known for being a bastion of diversity and inclusivity. So when a vicar comes and talks about these things, people enjoy it, and I enjoy doing those talks. So if anyone wants to consider contacting me and saying, well, would you come and do a talk, I'm always happy to talk about possible events or projects. I think it's important.
Wonderful. Well, it's been a real pleasure, Sarah, talking to you today, and I wish you well. And we send our love from Burnley. Is Burnley a place you've ever frequented? Have you been to Burnley, Sarah?
Um, Many years ago, I used to be a folk musician, and so on gigs and stuff. But I think the nearest I got to Burnley was probably the north bits of Manchester in some of the clubs there.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I've never been to Burnley. But at the moment, I'm keeping quite an eye on Burnley Football Club because my club. My dad came from Liverpool. I'm an Evertonian. So Everton, Leeds and Burnley are slugging it out not to be relegated.
Yes.
So, but I'm a great admirer of what Sean Dyche and Burnley have done over the years.
Yeah, yeah. Wonderful. Okay, Sarah. So thank you so much for coming on the Godcast. And if anybody wants to catch any more interviews, almost as simply finding Sarah, just Google the Godcast and you'll find lots of interviews there. So for now, thank you for watching, and we send our love to you all. Goodbye.